to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Muir. I'm the community librarian at Cary Library. I would like to thank the donors to the Cary Library Foundation for all of their support of our programming, both virtual and in person when we're able to do that. I am recording today's program and I will be posting it to our YouTube channel after the fact. I will share that link with all of you so that you can share it with anybody who missed today's program, or if you just want to revisit it yourself, you are welcome to. We will have time for questions. Mostly at the end of the program, you're welcome to put something into chat at any point if a question occurs to you. I will moderate that. If you want to ask your question out loud or engage in a conversation with our author, you can unmute yourself and I will call on you so that we don't speak over each other and we can all hear the questions and the answers. So with that, I'm very excited to welcome Carol van den Hende. She's an award-winning author who pens stories of resilience and hope. Her novel, Goodbye Orchid, has been recognized as the 2020 American Fiction Award winner for urban fiction and the 2020 Pinnacle Achievement Award winner for multicultural fiction. She's also told me before we started that her book has won another prize, but I'm not going to tell you what won because it's a little bit of a spoiler. So that's meant to entice you to find the book and read it and see if you can tell what kind of other award it's won. It's also been named one of the most anticipated fall reads by BuzzFeed, Parade, and Travel and Leisure. Carol is also a speaker, strategist, board member, and climate reality leader. One secret to her good fortune, she says, is her humorous husband, fun-loving twins, and rescue cat, who prove that love really does conquer all. Thank you, Carol, for being here. I will turn things over to you now.
Awesome. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Happy Friday. Speaking of humorous hubby, today is actually my humorous hubby's birthday, which is, and it's especially ironic because I have my humorous hubby's brother on the line too. And this, hello, Rob. This made me laugh a little because when Christine asked me how to pronounce my last name, Christine, you might have noticed I giggled a little when I said Van den Hende, because the funny thing is in our family, even within the same family, we pronounce that same last name differently. So Rob often pronounces it Van den Hende, and then my Dutch father-in-law pronounces it in the proper Dutch way, which I cannot do justice to. But it is so great to be here with all of you for tea and a little discussion. I looked up what today is. You know, there's a national day for every day. Today, it turns out to be National App Day, so an excuse to use our phones. And it's also National Noodle Ring Day, which I think I'd forgotten that noodles actually come in that round shape, but it made me a little nostalgic for chicken noodle soup. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to have a chance. Right now, what we're doing is introductions. We're going to have a chance to hear a bit about Goodbye Orchid. I'm going to share some content to introduce you to the story of Goodbye Orchid. And then we're going to have a third section, which is all around Q&A. What are you curious about, you know, to have conversation, which we can have along the way as well. So, you know, in terms of introductions, I'll introduce myself a little bit more, but I'd also love to hear from you. Anyone who would like to, feel free, please. I'd love for you to introduce yourself. You know, share with me if you've read Goodbye Orchid, or if you're just newly being introduced to it, and if you have anything specific in mind that you absolutely want to make sure that I address when I introduce Goodbye Orchid. So I'll kick off with a little bit more introduction to add on to Christine's lovely bio that she read, and then just ask anybody else who wants to unmute and go ahead and introduce themselves to do so. So as Christine said, I'm Carol van den Hende, and I often think of my life in three areas, or three concentric rings, perhaps. You know, the center being my family. I'm married, and we have twins. So we have 17-year-old twins in our household, which keeps us super busy, especially since they're seniors in high school and applying for college. And then I have my work life. I have a corporate life at Mars. I'm a corporate strategist. I've also had a career as a marketer and a digital technologist. And then this third area I think of as the ways in which I try to give back. And being an author and a speaker is part of that giving back. You know, and in fact, if I were to articulate what I hope to do in the world, you know, my legacy, you know, or thinking about your personal why, I often articulate it as inspiring hope and empathy for people and planet. And so Goodbye Orchid is part of that, telling a story that is meant to inspire hope and empathy. And I'll share with you in a little bit what some readers have said that have shown me that it absolutely is able to and is doing that in the world, which makes me incredibly proud. And then part of that giving back too is the climate reality leader piece that Christine talked about. I just finished economics and neutrality training, and I also volunteer on the board of directors for a special needs school. So that's me in a nutshell. Does anyone want to say a hello, share your experience with Goodbye Orchid, if anything at all, and any particular questions you want to make sure I address? And I'll take a sip of my cuppa while you guys are sharing with me.
And feel free to just unmute yourself and just speak up if you want. Harold is unmuted. I don't know if you want to say something or if that was unintentional.
Harold just went on mute, so I'm thinking that was unintentional.
Exactly.
I'll break the ice. I'm Rob Van Den Hende, or Van Den Hende, or in Dutch Van Den Hende, if you want to pronounce it with the Dutch pronunciation. I have read the book, and I just wanted to hear Carol speak about some of her background on it as well. I thought it was very intriguing, very well researched, actually. Even though she's my sister-in-law, I can really tell that she did her work and homework on that. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. I get a lot of questions about the research, especially in book clubs. So there's two types of talks I tend to do on Goodbye Orchid. One is this type, in which I'm introducing Goodbye Orchid to new readers. And then another is book clubs, where the entire group has read Goodbye Orchid and we discuss it. And when we discuss it, there are many questions about the research. And when you read Goodbye Orchid, you will see why people are asking me about the research. Anyone else? Shirley, Karen, Kelly, Deborah, Teresa. And I know that's not Harold, but whoever's using Harold's Zoom. Well, no problem. There's going to be plenty of opportunities. Feel free to, as we go along, to go ahead and speak up and ask questions. Put your questions in the chat box, raise your hand, all of that. While you are thinking about that, I am getting this is a multimedia experience that we're going to have here today. So for me to introduce Goodbye Orchid, I'm going to use just a couple pages. Don't worry, that's not a long PowerPoint at all, but I think it's sometimes helpful to have some visuals to go with the description. And so I'll share a little bit about Goodbye Orchid through the use of multimedia, and I'll actually read a passage from Goodbye Orchid as well. So you can see here some of the awards that Christine mentioned that Goodbye Orchid has won, which makes me, super proud that it's been recognized as best first novel. It's been recognized for multicultural fiction. It's been recognized for urban fiction because it's actually set in New York City. So it's set in Manhattan and New Jersey. And so, very much East Coast vibe for all of us East Coasters in the house. But let me introduce you to the main characters of Goodbye Orchid. And then after I introduce the story, I'll get into a bit of the inspiration behind the story, because oftentimes people ask me about that and I'm very curious about that. But first, I would love to introduce you to Phoenix Walker. He's 32 years old, a very successful entrepreneur. He has started his own advertising agency at a young age and been incredibly successful his whole life, really, star athlete, student president, has had a lot of success in his life, and he works really hard for it. So it's not like it's been handed to him with a golden spoon in his mouth. He's worked incredibly hard for that, and he's proud of what he's achieved. But it also comes a bit at a price, So with every character in a book, there's both the, kind of external and internal conflict. And for Phoenix, the internal conflict is, that lifetime of striving comes with the double-edged sword of perfectionism that drives him. And, as with anything that seems like it could be good on the surface, there can be a dark side too. And you'll see how that plays out in this story. The first line of the story is actually, Phoenix Walker never believed today was goodbye. And that comes into play because, that first chapter, and you'll hear a little bit of it, the two of them are Phoenix and Orchid Page are at the airport. And he's taken her there to say goodbye so that she can go on a 6-week business trip. Orchid Page is a half Asian. She's works in the beauty industry. She's a marketer in the beauty industry. And so, he thinks today is not goodbye, that he's just saying goodbye to her for 6 weeks. They've fallen in love after working together on advertising campaigns, actually pro bono advertising campaigns to help raise money for military veterans. And so through that work, he actually learns that she's actually quite sensitive to images of trauma, that she's experienced trauma in her own childhood. She lost her parents at a young age, and she witnessed the accident that took her parents' lives. And so that's left her very sensitive to images of trauma, and he feels very protective of her because of that. So the central tension of what happens in the story is that disaster strikes. These two that are at the precipice of, really the greatest love of their lives are faced with disaster. And the disaster takes the form of an accident in which Phoenix is forever changed. And so when he wakes in the hospital, injured, in pain, he is longing for Orchid, thinking of her. He knows that she's left, she's on her 6-week business trip. But he also knows, after the disaster that struck him, because she's sensitive to images of trauma, he feels protective of her. And so therefore he feels faced with the hardest decision of his life, whether to protect Orchid and therefore love her. He might need to say goodbye, Orchid. And that's why if you look at any of the descriptions of the book, it talks about rising from ashes is hard, but giving up the one you love is harder. And the subtitle to the book is To Love Her, He Had to Leave Her. And so Phoenix's name is very meaningful because it is hearkening back to mythology in which phoenixes, burn to the ground and have to rise from ashes. Orchid's name is actually also meaningful because Orchid, first she's half Asian, so orchids have that, a bit of that Asian mystique, but also orchids have a reputation for being quite fragile. A friend of mine actually gave me an orchid as a, congratulations when Goodbye Orchid was launched and published. And I was so happy, but I also thought, oh no, I don't want to kill this orchid because, they have this reputation for being delicate. But actually in the wild, orchids are quite hardy and resilient. And so I love this name for the character Orchid Page because on the one hand, she has experienced trauma in her childhood. And Phoenix is protective of her, thinking of her as, sensitive and delicate, which she is in some ways, but also ultimately she is a very strong character with strong inner resilience that plays out through the story that you'll see how it plays out. And, I mentioned the perfectionism up front. This is, part of what causes the challenge between Phoenix and Orchid, his thought that he might need to be perfect for her or even for himself. So I hope that's enough intrigue. I'm going to share a little reading in a bit, but let me first answer the question that I think is oftentimes on readers' minds around the inspiration behind the story. And then I'll give you a little peek behind under. I always get my metaphors mixed up, like peek under the covers, peek behind the tent, something. There's some kind of, saying there. But so the inspiration for this story, and it came about years ago, actually. There was a period where I had turned to writing as a place of solace for myself, honestly. When I first started writing Goodbye Orchid, I didn't even know I was going to be pursuing publishing. I was really writing in a time that was a hard time in our own family. We were having problems with one of our twins. And so I started writing really for myself. And at that time, what I found was giving me inspiration was there were stories in the news of combat wounded veterans. And these stories were so moving because, the men and women who go to the most dangerous place in the world to fight for our freedom go at the top of their game, incredibly physically fit and trained. And then when they're combat wounded, they fall so far. But what was really inspiring was the strength and resilience that they demonstrate to get back to good. And that was incredible to me. And so Although the characters in Goodbye Orchid are not military characters, Phoenix and Orchid very much live in the world of Manhattan and in the business world, in the advertising agency, in the beauty industry. So they are not military people. But the arc of Phoenix's journey, in which he is injured and questions his own self, questions his self-worth, questions his relationship with Orchid, that experience actually mirrors that of some of our combat wounded veterans. And so while I would never claim to be able to capture every combat wounded veteran's experience, it is incredibly heartening to me that combat wounded veterans who have read Goodbye Orchid say that it does completely resonate with them. And in fact, what I'd love to share with you is a few quotes from combat wounded veterans who have read Goodbye Orchid. And so the first one, Bronze Star of Valor and Purple Heart decorated Doc Jacobs, says that he was truly captivated by my storytelling, that Phoenix Walker captures the mindset, roller coaster, and daily heroics of his experience after being injured, all around excellence. And one thing he told me was that beyond taking him back to his own experience being combat wounded 14 years ago and being a Walter Reed and recovering, it also, the story Goodbye Orchid also gave him insight into his own experience. He had never thought that much about, his dad and his grandmother who were at his bedside for 13 months at Walter Reed. He had never thought that much about their experience. And because Goodbye Orchid is told in multiple points of view, including Phoenix Walker's mother, Veronica, Phoenix Walker's twin brother, Caleb, that he really got this intense, deep sense of what his family members must have been going through emotionally, physically, how difficult it was honestly for them to go through this experience with him. And he really thanked me for that. And he's been an incredible supporter of Goodbye Orchid because it's touched him in that way. Another example is Sergeant Aaron Michael Grant, who's also a fellow author. So he talks about in this most worthy novel, the protagonist's lives are shattered and they reemerge champions, showing us a true test of character. He says Phoenix is all of us, unconquerable until we're conquered. He calls it a tale of sacrifice and rebirth, that heroism is in the details. And that touches me so much because who better to talk about heroism than these true American heroes? And this is just a couple of examples of actually multiple and many military veterans who have read and loved Goodbye Orchid and endorse it and have written just beautiful reviews. So this might be a good time to read a little passage to you, and then I'll share a little bit more of some other interesting tidbits and other perspectives on Goodbye Orchid. Any questions at this point? You guys are good. All right. I need to put on my reading glasses for this part. So this is from chapter 1. It's Sunday, July 29th, Manhattan, and we're in Phoenix's point of view. Phoenix never believed today was goodbye, even though hellos come with goodbyes, like black holes and Stephen Hawking, like donuts and donut holes. But today's goodbye wasn't the end of something. Orchid's kiss, petaled soft, had changed everything. That was last night. Today, she stood before him in a leather-edged tunic layered over tights. "It's not too late to come with me," she said, her laugh tinkling like the metal bangles on her arm. She and Phoenix stood at the mouth of the TSA pre-check line before airport security, parting a stream of passengers, lodged like two boulders in a brook. Her flight was boarding in minutes. "I'm not going to spoil your moment in the spotlight," he replied. She reached up for a hug. Her slender frame made Phoenix feel even taller than 6 feet. Yet there was tenderness, too. "Mentor, I'm her mentor," he recalled, slipping from her embrace. "Spoil my moment? You know I wouldn't be going to China if it weren't for you. You always encouraged me." Her voice rose above the hum of conversations around them. Her lashes were ringed coal black. Pale skin and ebony hair framed her dark eyes. "Who, me? You did all the hard work. Stop giving me the credit you deserve. You're going to be awesome," Phoenix said. "Thank you. Thanks for seeing me off." "How else was I going to get rid of you?" he asked, his voice oddly gruff. "Shut up." I have abandonment issues, you know that. She blinked, then her left cheek dimpled. He knew better than to think that she was joking. He wasn't going to tell her, but if it came to it, he'd protect her from a 787 Dreamliner crashing through the windows of their terminal. Orchid tiptoed up to kiss his cheek. The edges of their mouths brushed. Crap. He stepped back and her hopeful expression came into focus. You better get going or there won't be any China, he said, and released her elbow. It struck him that their stance mimicked Michelangelo's creation of Adam, their hands nearly touching, as if heaven was in those millimeters between. And that's just the start of chapter 1. And the book moves very quickly. Many people, many readers have said it is a page turner because by the end of chapter 1, that disaster that strikes that we just talked about will happen in chapter 1. And the story just gallops from there. In fact, I've had readers tell me they've read the book in 3 days, in 2 sittings, or in 1. Readers have emailed me at 1 o'clock in the morning saying, I stayed up way past my bedtime to finish to find out what happens in Goodbye Orchid. And one reader just last week sent me an email that said, I finished at 4 in the morning. I was too tired to write my review at that moment, but I'll write it later, I promise. And so I definitely hear a lot of the story moves fast and it is a page turner. And here's what some other people have said about Goodbye Orchid. So Gordana is a Project Runway couture designer. She goes by Goga as her nickname. And she actually, after she read Goodbye Orchid, she said it was a human drama that traverses every emotion, reminding her how life can change in a second. It's a beautifully written tale about the power of true love to overcome deep-seated misbeliefs, and that Phoenix and Orchid story will forever live in her heart. And then Chris, who is an actor and author, wrote that Goodbye Orchid. It's a beautiful book full of deep, thoughtful truths, as well as hard-won wisdom for its protagonists. All the characters are richly drawn. The author never shies away from showing us their flawed humanity. Their individualized and honest perspectives make the journeys as surprising as they are engaging. And he and I talked about this after he read it, and he did tell me, that he was amazed at how, the depths that the characters go to. They're, I describe them up front as starting as very successful people, and they are, but they are going to fall to some depths. The disaster that strikes is quite life altering. And so that's why he says the author never shies away from showing us their flawed humanity. So that just gives you a little taste, and you'll see, if you go to my website or if you look at the book, there are many quotes from Caroline Levitt, from Karen Tanabe, from Susan Cushman, from many, many authors, from CEOs, and also from military personnel. And speaking of, if you go to my website, if you are a part of book clubs, there are amazing materials out there. There is a book club kit. There are printable bookmarks. There's a lot of things on there. You can either go to carolvandenhende.com, which maybe Christine can put into the chat at some point in our hour together, or this link tree is very helpful. linktr.ee/cvdh has a link to not only my website, but also places to purchase the book from, Amazon or from indie bookstores, including Belmont Books, who has been so gracious to support us for this particular talk today. And also places to find me on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. I'm on all of those places. And so Linktree is a wonderful spot because it gives you access to all of those in one place. So please, please check that out. And then the only other thing I'll just mention, because Goodbye Orchid actually, I still need to get to the inspiration story, and I also need to share that Goodbye Orchid is really meant to do good in the world, and part of its doing good, one is in the message of the story itself, because it's really meant to inspire hope and empathy. But also, secondly, a portion of the profits of the book is going to charity, and it has already been donated to 2 charities. One is Heather Abbott Foundation. The other is USA Cares. USA Cares helps post 9/11 military veterans and their families. And then as part of trying to fundraise for charities, Goodbye Orchid has partnered with a few different places. There's a local coffee shop in New Jersey that Goodbye Orchid's partnered with to raise money for USA Cares. And then this is available nationally. So Goodbye Orchid has partnered with Beloved Bath. Beloved Bath hand makes candles, soap. The scents are heavenly, beautiful, beautiful products. And their mission is actually to provide meaningful employment for people with autism. So earlier on, I shared in the third part of my life that I am on the board of directors for a special needs school. That special needs school helps kids with autism. And so this is also another cause that's very meaningful for me. And so these gift packages are available for the holidays and beyond, to be able to get an autographed paperback of Goodbye Orchid with bookmark and a Beloved Bath lavender blossom hand poured candle. These candles smell amazing and they're so high quality that one candle can burn for more than 50 hours. And then the book and the candle, the holiday gift set, a portion of the profits will go to help USA Cares, military families, and also people with autism. So both Beloved Bath and Goodbye Orchid have committed to donating to charity. So definitely check out belovedbath.com if that is of interest. I think it makes a really beautiful gift. They gift wrap everything incredibly beautifully. So I think that's it for this. So I'm going to stop the screen share so that we can chat and make sure, because I feel like I always forget something that I'm supposed to tell you. So make sure we cover everything. So I covered the origin story of the inspirational combat wounded veterans, and that's a lot of times what I get asked about is around that. What else are you all curious about? And while you're thinking of questions, I also can tell you a little bit about the design aspect of Goodbye Orchid. Where did I put my book? Oh, here it is. Feel free, everyone can unmute and talk to me and tell me what questions you have on your mind while you're thinking of questions. Oh, this is so funny. So Goodbye Orchid, one of the things that I want to share is a lot of thought has been put into the design of the cover and the design of the book in total. So you see the shattered orchids on the front, and you also see them behind me. Those shattered orchids represent the physical and emotional shattering of the characters of Phoenix and Orchid when they go through this life-changing accident and how they deal with the aftermath of that. But that design element has played through in other ways. And so if you go to that the media kit on my website, you'll see there are also animated versions of this same cover in which you can see it as a GIF, where the orchids are either shattering, which represents Phoenix's accident, or there's another version of it in which there's petals falling in a very sorrowful manner, which represents Orchid's sorrow over their relationship. Then we also built that design element into the book itself. So when you get a physical copy of Goodbye Orchid, the lower right corner of every page has an image of orchids. And if you flip through the pages, the orchids will appear to shatter until you get to the darkest point of the story. And then they visually come back together until you get to the emotionally satisfying ending. So it's almost like a little flip book feature inside of Goodbye Orchid. And in fact, Rob, who's on the phone here with us today, his sister, Maria, my sister-in-law, is the one who created that inspiration for embedding that design feature right into the physical book as well. So it's really special. I've been on the phone with many bookstores in getting ready for the holiday season, and they're very excited over that detail. It's really unique. And it makes people want really the physical book over the ebook a lot of times, because in the ebook, you can't get the flipping feature. Hey, Shirley, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Just going back to the first slide that you showed, the photograph, was that David Beckham?
Yes. Well, you know, I have to say that's who I pictured while I was writing Phoenix. I'm not sure David would give me permission to use his picture, but he's the best.
I won't tell him, but
okay, thank you.
when I read it, I shall have David Beckham's face now and in mind, and the different guises of David Beckham from when he was a very young David Beckham to the David he is now. So,
Yeah.
but I just thought he looks incredibly familiar.
Yes, I think he's so interesting. I mean, he has so many different looks too. He can look very serious. He can be playful. He can be charming. Yeah.
And one of the, I mean, not to digress too far, but when he was playing soccer for Manchester United as a youngster, they shielded him from the press originally because he had difficulty expressing himself. So they kind of tutored him for quite a while, and he has now become a very good speaker. And when you hear him, and he's just speak from the heart, and he has a lot of environmental and humanitarian issues that he's involved in. So he, as a person, has evolved quite dramatically from a genius soccer player to the person that he is today.
Yeah, that makes him another good analogy for Phoenix then, because Phoenix also will evolve a lot in this
Yeah.
story. So great. Good to
Okay.
find a fellow fan. In fact, that's one of the games we play in book clubs, is if we have a book club meeting, sometimes I'll ask people to cast Phoenix and Orchid after reading the story. Who do they picture? And that's always fun to hear, because I have my own picture in my mind, but I love for people to add their own creativity.
My daughter and I do that when we read books too. We think about who we would cast for the movie.
Yeah,
It's
really
kind of fun.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the research that you did. You mentioned that some military veterans had high accolades for the book. And I know you don't want to give away any spoilers in the story, but tell us a little bit about how you researched that world and that culture, because I think that would be challenging.
Yeah, I mean, the research took multiple forms. And so there is the desk research piece, which is certainly, there's a lot of information out there about, people who've been through traumatic accidents and what happens. And I wanted to arm myself with as much of that information as possible, because if I'm going to represent a really serious, incident that can happen in a real person's life, I want to treat that with the utmost respect. And so I did, as much desk research as I could. But then after that, I did reach out to real people, and people were so generous with their time. And there were several groups of people that helped. One, survivors of trauma, trauma that is depicted in Goodbye Orchid, including combat wounded veterans, were incredibly generous, answering my questions over email, getting on the phone with me, actually meeting me in person, so that I could really understand not just the physical journey, but the emotional and the mental journey as well. And so I capture the stages of grief from, denial, anger, bargaining, acceptance. That is all in Goodbye Orchid. And also the other areas that were helpful were medical professionals. So surgeons helped me with the actual concrete details, but then also psychologists, so there were many sensitivity readers, and my acknowledgement pages, there's a few at the end to name all the people. And one of the things I say is that, who knew that writing a novel is a team sport? Certainly my name is on the cover, but so many people really gave, their heart and gave so much knowledge and were so generous in helping with Goodbye Orchid.
We have a question in chat from Teresa. It's a multi-part question, but I'll read all of it and then I'll just remind you if you miss anything. She says, I'm curious about your writing process and how you found time while working, raising twins, etc. Do you belong to a writing group? And what was the best piece of writing advice you received that helped you through writing this book?
Very cool. Teresa, are you a fellow writer? Those sound like very writerly questions. So feel free to tell me if you are. So the first question was about my writing process and how I found time. I, get that question a lot because yes, I have a very busy life, but I think a couple of things helped me. One, clarity of what's important to me. So sometimes, and maybe this answers a bit of the third piece, which is the writerly advice. I speak at writers' conferences, and I've been teaching at writers' conferences the last 7 years. And one of the things I have said to writers is that they should have clarity around their inspiring purpose. What's the reason that they write? What are they trying to do in the world? And for me, that's very important, because having clarity of that true north allows me to know when I'm spending time on things that are important to that and when I'm not. So I think I had shared with you, I articulate my own for myself as inspiring hope and empathy for people and planet. And so the things I do should be aligned to that. And if I'm doing something that's not aligned to that, that's not a really aligned use of my time. And so then I tend not to do that. So for instance, one of the choices I make is I don't watch much TV. I hardly watch TV because that doesn't, unless, it doesn't really help me inspire hope and empathy for people and planet. And so that frees up a lot of time. The average American, I think in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, they find that 3.4 hours a day is spent on TV by the average American. So, that could give me 3.5 hours a day. That's good. I also, when I was writing Goodbye Orchid, was so gripped by the story. It was such a work of my heart that I couldn't stop writing even if I wanted to. It would wake me in the middle of the night and make me put words on the page. And it was like an obsession while I was writing. Phoenix and Orchid felt more real to me sometimes than the real people around me. Sorry, Rob, don't take that personally. So, there was certainly an obsession or passion aspect of that. And then the other thing I would give credit to, I dedicated the book to my humorous hubby. And so he is incredible. He does so much around the house to keep things running so that I can pursue my passions. So he does the laundry and the grocery shopping and the dishes, and he makes breakfast for the kids in the morning. Like, he's just such a fabulous support, and I could not do everything I do without him. You asked about writing groups as well, Teresa. So I'm a member of New Jersey Romance Writers, and I joined them because I was writing what I thought was a love story, and therefore I thought I was writing a romance, and they're a lovely group of writers, and I love still being a member there. I have come to learn, though, that Goodbye Orchid is not a romance. It's not genre romance the way that other romances are. It's actually contemporary fiction in terms of its genre. Contemporary fiction with romantic elements. So there is a touch of love story in there. Certainly the love story between Orchid and Phoenix is at the center of the book, but there's so much more to it as well in terms of Phoenix's journey, and actually even Caleb's journey, Phoenix's twin brother. And so people who do love romance have told me that it's better for them not to think of this as romance when they read it, because it doesn't fully fit romance. It's more women's fiction or contemporary fiction. But I am still a member of New Jersey Romance Writers. And I'm also a member of Women Who Write, who is hosting me next week, actually. So if anyone has read Goodbye Orchid or plans to, and because it is readable in a sitting or in 2 days, as I've shared with you from other readers, feel free to join me for that. It's on the 16th, so it's in the evening next week. I believe it's 6:30 at night or something, and it's open to the public. So you don't have to be a member of Women Who Write. They have a spot on their website on womenwhowrite.org, and it's also on my website. You can click on the link and actually sign up to join for that book club discussion. And there, if you've read Goodbye Orchid, what's fun is then we don't have to be like, oh, we can't go there because we don't want to give away spoilers. We can talk about everything, like every little detail, and no holds barred. So that's going to be super fun. So definitely try to pick up Goodbye Orchid and join us for that. And then the third question around the writerly advice, I think, there was a piece that I already shared around being clear on your objective so that you can make sure your time is aligned with that. There's a lot of the advice you hear given to writers is around perseverance, because there is a lot of rejection in writing. There's more than 1 million titles on Amazon, and therefore it is hard to break through. So luckily, given my career background as a marketer and as a strategist, I was able to apply a lot of that to the launch of Goodbye Orchid. And so it's really wonderful to see that it's a multi-awarded, book that's been so well received. I don't know, maybe it depends. And Teresa, I know I saw your answer too, that you're just a curious reader. So, if there are writers on the line with more specific writerly questions, feel free to ask. And then Rob wants to know about future projects. So yes, I have been fairly busy and I haven't had as much time for writing as I would like, but I would love to continue actually the story of Goodbye Orchid. And so as I've been meeting readers, going to book clubs, I actually, the week before Thanksgiving, I think I had 3 book clubs that week alone. And so a lot of book clubs have been calling me. I have a bunch on my website you can see too. that what I've been hearing is there's a lot of curiosity about what happens afterwards, you know. So there is an emotionally satisfying ending. Goodbye Orchid is definitely a book that can stand alone and will totally make sense on its own. But there's a lot of clamoring for a sequel to find out more about Orchid and Phoenix, and also Phoenix's twin brother Caleb and his twin brother Caleb's ex-girlfriend Sasha. Those four characters play a lot of big roles in the book. Rob is smiling because you like red latex wrapped, Sasha, Rob. And then sometimes there's also been a request for a prequel, you know. So the book does, you know, share in flashbacks how Phoenix and Orchid came to this point in chapter 1, where they're saying goodbye at the airport, where Phoenix doesn't believe that today is goodbye. But there's, you know, some desire for, you know, give us more of that, you know, what actually, how did they go through those months of working together on the military pro bono ad campaign to really get to know each other and fall in love.
How long did it take you to write Goodbye Orchid when you factor in all of the research, and especially being a debut novel? I'm just curious about the timeline of that. And then thinking forward to, will other books, do you think, be the same amount of time, or do you think it gets easier as you get more under your belt?
Yeah, so I do expect that it's going to get easier in some, you know, in some ways. And so I'm going to share the timeline, but don't anybody be scared. And it's not going to take this long, definitely, for books 2 and 3. So the actual project started 7 years ago. So that's why I say don't be scared. And that's very common. I'm in a group with debut novelists. There are hundreds of us, and actually it's very common to hear 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, longer sometimes. And for me, that journey was about a year of very intense writing, that period where I was woken up in the middle of the night and couldn't help but get words on the page. And then a year of very intense editing, in which it wasn't just my own editing. I also hired a freelance editor. I signed with an agent, and the agent had a point of view. He's had a 4-decade career in publishing. He's actually been the head of Amazon Publishing, been the head of Hachette. He had a point of view on editing as well, and so he shaped it. And so we worked really hard on, you know, shaping the story. And then there was a period of finding the right publisher. And this is where, when I described a little of that story, that I initially thought that I was writing a romance because there was love between Phoenix and Orchid, and then realized that it wasn't a romance, that kind of created a big detour for me because I probably was going to the wrong editors and things. So ultimately, at the beginning of this year, when I found the right publisher and signed a contract, then things super sped up in terms of planning for and then launching Goodbye Orchid. And so a prequel or sequel should be much faster because, first, the world building is already done. The characters are, you know, and their backstories are quite set. And so it should be much faster. And then I have my publisher now. And so it should be much faster to have books 2 and 3 come out. It will not be 7 years, do not worry.
It's definitely, yeah, that is definitely very common. We've hosted several authors whose first book can be anywhere from 7 to 10 years. But then I was thinking that once you kind of know the characters and the setting, it probably does get a little easier to put the pieces together and focus on the story rather than all of the different elements of it.
Exactly. Yeah, so true. So I'm curious, for the readers on the phone today, as I describe Goodbye Orchid, is it reminding you of anything? What does it sound like to you? What are you curious about? Talk to me. Unmute and talk to me, please.
And it's a small enough crowd that everybody's welcome to unmute, and I'll just intervene if we start talking over each other, but I don't think that will happen. While people are thinking about that, I'm glad that you addressed, as a librarian, I was wondering what genre this falls under, because it sort of sounded like romance, but then, you know, from the description, I don't know how much of the story is about the love between Orchid and, I just blanked on the
Phoenix,
name.
yeah.
Phoenix. I knew it was a P. Versus the story of his journey recovering from whatever it is that happened. So I wasn't sure where the balance was. So
Yeah. It's a bit told in two halves. So the first half will be his recovery, and the second half will be, more of their story. Yeah, the genre question is so interesting, and yeah, I would say contemporary fiction is probably better. It's better off there.
It's interesting for a librarian, of course, because we work a lot in genres, but also because I think romance sometimes gets knocked down a little bit for some stereotypes. And I've actually been studying romance more this year, and there are a lot of good reasons to read romance. There's a lot of great things about it. And one of the things that I've most appreciated recently is that romance is really diversifying voices. So when you talked about winning the Diversity Award and the Urban Setting Award, I think that's a big benefit that romance really, I think, started, and it's expanding into the contemporary fiction and women's fiction. So we're starting to hear more voices, more settings, seeing people in places that may not look like our lives, which I think is a great way for people to learn more about other people's lifestyles.
Yeah, and that's what I mean when I talk about the empathy piece. There's actually research where if you look at what parts of the brain light up in a writer's brain when they're writing certain scenes, that those same places light up in a reader's brain when they're reading those scenes. So it's basically saying the emotion the writer feels is what is transferred to the reader. It's the closest thing you can get to brain, empathy, really. And so I think that's so incredible, the power that storytelling has.
Yeah, that's amazing. Nobody else is unmuting, but you're welcome to. Please feel free to jump in. I'm a librarian. I could talk forever. Shirley, go ahead.
I was wondering, when you do the prequel, will that move that into the romance genre because they're leading up to their romance, or would it still stay as contemporary fiction, or would it straddle both areas? Does that happen?
I tend to think that it will still be either women's fiction. I think it'll still be women's fiction or contemporary fiction. Yeah. That's my thought. Yeah. Hey, Rob.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, from when I read the book, there was a lot of details as far as fashion is concerned. And I'm not the most fashion conscious guy. So for the women who read this book, I'm sure they'll appreciate that portion of the book a lot more than I do. But it does, it does have a large element in there. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I mean, I've had some readers who know me say that they see me in Orchid, because I do love a certain flair, and I love things that might not be the expected or traditional. And so Orchid has that, a bit amplified. She has this love of, feathers and faux leather and, all mixed in a seemingly unplanned flurry that she puts together with panache. What I would say, though, is it's actually very light, the touches of fashion in there, Rob. You might feel that because you're not that interested, but I'm not the type to go on and on. There are some books, I won't name names, but I almost cannot get through them because the description is overwrought. And there's just so much, and they feel the need to describe every little detail. I am not that type of writer. And that's part of the, when I talk about that year of intense editing, and especially with my editor and with my agent, we cut every little bit of fat out of there. So there might be, it's a very light drop of description just to get a visual sense. And so you heard, like in the opening paragraph, it talks about the metal bangles on her arm tinkling, to give her a sense that she's wearing some accessories. There's one, in the cocktail party scene, Rob, you might be thinking about, it describes her dress a little just because she's wearing a cocktail dress, but the rest of the scene is all about the two of them. And then there's one scene where at Fashion Week, in which there's some description. But other than that, if you actually look, I would say it's probably less than 1% of the words in the book are actually around fashion, Rob. So I wouldn't say it's heavy on fashion description.
No, I just, for me, it was like, oh, yeah, okay, it's there. But I was just wondering about the, where you derived it from, and I recognize some of the yes, I guess your style somewhat in the characters. But for me, as a guy, yeah, I noticed it. I noticed that there was quite a bit of details in there that I wouldn't even know what the heck you're talking about. Different types of verbiage that's simply not used in the guy's background or in guys day to day.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, I actually, oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'd continue if you would. I'm changing the subject. So how do you feel when your editor or your publisher makes dramatic changes to your words that you've put down? Do you feel hurt that they don't feel that they're worthy of that particular part, or what's your initial reaction?
Yeah, interesting question about my reaction to the editing process. And so I'd say it's gone through phases. When I was first working with my freelance editor, it probably felt more dramatic because that in the developmental editing phase, you're really shaping the arc of the story. And so that had a lot more debate about it and, what is appropriate to include, what's not appropriate to include. Um, so that definitely was more dramatic phase. Over time, I think writers come to understand, you always often hear the phrase writing is rewriting, and that is the case. Editing is so important. And so over time, I think writers become accustomed to just knowing that your words are going to be changed and that the initial ones might not be the best way to tell the story or even the right, story to be telling. And so I'd say over time, I've become more zen about it. And in fact, the latest round with the publisher, with Kohler Books, was very collaborative. So the editor, shared thoughts about what should be changed, but he was very respectful of my point of view. And so I could push back on anything that I didn't feel was right. And so there were many things where I was like, nope, we can't change that because of X, Y, or Z reason. Or many other places where I thought, oh, he actually is making a good point, and that makes the story stronger. In the end, it can't be about the author's ego. It needs to be about what serves the story best to create the best experience for the reader.
I just thought, with it being your first experience of going through this, if you felt hurt that some of your passages or some of your words weren't appreciated, and obviously as you've explained, it makes it stronger, and so going forward you've got more of a sense of what's required.
Yeah, such a good question, because it is hard to. I remember some of the scariest things I did was when I was in an in-person critique group and needing to read the work aloud and get feedback in the moment.
Oh,
that is a really interesting experience. And I did that week after week for more than a year, I think, during my editing period, during my writing and editing period in an in-person critique group. And this is through Women Who Write. Such a good learning experience, though, because you can see in the moment what triggers emotion. And it was actually around that kitchen table, this Women Who Write kitchen table, where I had the first experience of making readers cry. And although it seems a little twisted, I think authors might like making readers cry because it means that you're able to really evoke strong emotion. And I have heard that with Goodbye Orchid, and it depends, because also the reader brings so much of themselves to the story as well. And so readers have said, bring tissues when you're reading Goodbye Orchid. And it depends on your own experience and how much you relate to it personally. But it can be a very emotional read as well. And then I saw a question about what I'm reading now and authors that I love. I often say I love Jojo Moyes. And when I was asking all of you about what books that Goodbye Orchid might remind you of, I think sometimes Goodbye Orchid is a little bit likened to some of Jojo Moyes' work. Also, recently read Caroline Levitt's new book. I recently read, which is called With or Without You. I recently read Karen Tanabe's 100 Suns, just beautiful books. And then I'm part of this debut writers group. So I've been reading some of the debut authors' books. The Mountain Sing is this Vietnamese poet this is her debut in English, but she's multi-published already before that. And just some amazing, beautiful work. And I feel like my list of what I want to read versus what I can actually get to is, the list is quite long. I'm sure, Christine, you feel that way as well.
It is. And I was thinking when Teresa asked about the best piece of writing advice you received, an author that I hosted last week said, read, keep reading, because everything you read gives you more material to draw from in terms of maybe inspiring something, or just the way something's phrased, or just increasing your vocabulary so you have different ways of writing about things. But immersing yourself in the writing world by reading is one way to maybe strengthen your stories.
I would build on that advice. In addition to that, I would say be choiceful what you read, because yes, bad writing can put bad ideas in your head just as well as good writing can put good ideas in your head. I judged a contest one time in which some of the manuscripts were so poorly written or edited that it stopped my ability to write for a few days. I needed a few days to get those words out of my head so that I could write well again. And so, yeah, I'd say be careful what you read.
It's a good balance, because sometimes it's good to see what doesn't work and know not to test it out yourself. So yeah, it can definitely go both ways. Yeah. We have time for maybe one more question if anybody wants to ask anything else.
I just have a quick question. During the editing process, do you think that there are any passages or sections removed that might make a good short story, almost like outtakes on a DVD?
Yeah, one thing writers do, and I have a Word document that looks just like this. It's almost like I think I called it the good bits or something, where, you have to make hard decisions, and maybe a passage is beautifully written, but it doesn't serve the story and it doesn't serve the reader. And that's where the books that are too fat, that you kind of like lose interest in, it's because the writer couldn't make those hard decisions to kill their darlings. That expression exists too. And so I do have a Word document of pieces and passages and scenes that were really meaningful to me, but didn't serve the story. And there's a good 100,000 words in that document. It's not a small document. It is, there's a lot. You cut out as much as you keep.
When you started, how many words did you have? And when you were done, how many words were you left over with?
So the finished book is 67,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
It's 280 pages. So, I know most people don't think in word count. Yeah, so having 100,000 words on the side is a lot more than a short story.
Yeah, you got rid of half your book, in other words, or a little bit more than half.
Yeah,
that's a lot.
Very common, very common. I know we're out of time, but I just want to say a few thank yous. Thank you so much to Christine and Carrie Memorial Library, which is a beautiful library. I see the photos online and I can't wait to come visit in person one day, because I have family up in Bedford, so not too far. And then also thank you to Belmont Books, who, is providing books. So anyone here can order from Belmont Books their copies of Goodbye Orchid. And then just thank you to all of you for making time today. Really appreciate it. Please do look for Goodbye Orchid. Join for my book club next week. Shop Beloved Bath. And after you read Goodbye Orchid, I would definitely appreciate reviews.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Carol. This was a really fantastic discussion, and I'm so intrigued to read the story. I've not read it yet, so it will go onto my list and I will be reading it shortly. Thank you to everyone who came and joined us this morning. We really appreciate that. And I hope that we are able to host in-person events soon and bring you back, Carol, maybe around the time that the sequel or the prequel comes out, and we can have another discussion in person. That would be wonderful. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.